Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Midsi Sanchez. Midsi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992 in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, close-knit family with two brothers and a sister. Midsi was a cheerful and bright child who enjoyed spending time outdoors with her friends and playing with her siblings from a young age. When she started elementary school, Midsi was quite independent. Her parents allowed her to walk to school with her brother without any adult supervision, as the school was located just a short distance from their home, with most of the route lying along a busy road. On August 10, 2000, Midsi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had been preparing. She asked her mother if she could skip school for the occasion, but her mother said no. Midsi was upset about it, and around 7:30 a.m., she left her home with her brother. Midsi was supposed to wait for her brother so they could walk home together, but when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find his sister anywhere. Thinking she had already left without him, he headed home alone, but it turned out that Midsi was not there. Their older sister, who was home at that time, immediately became worried, since Midsi was eagerly anticipating her birthday party, and her absence seemed odd. She waited for some time, hoping that Midsi would eventually show up, and around 4 p.m., she decided to call their mom and tell her about it. Midsi's mother called her school and confirmed she attended all her classes. After contacting family and friends with no luck, Midsi's relatives grew concerned and began searching for her. Family, friends, neighbors, and others joined in, organizing a large search effort. Some walked the streets, while others knocked on doors along the route from school to home. Flyers with Midsi's information were also printed and distributed. Despite all their efforts, they couldn't find her, so Midsi's parents decided to call 911. The police immediately joined the search, and local media started covering the case on the same day of Midsi's disappearance. In recent years, similar incidents had already occurred in their town, where an unknown perpetrator or multiple perpetrators had been kidnapping kids in Vallejo. The most recent case had occurred in December 1999, less than a year before Midsi's disappearance, when 7-year-old Shiana Fairchild, who lived just a few miles from Midsi's house, disappeared on her way to school. Despite all the efforts by the police and the FBI, she was never found. Now, when Midsi vanished on her way home from school, investigators feared the same perpetrator might be involved. Despite the lack of leads at that point, the striking similarities between those cases were already obvious. However, Xana's case remained unsolved, leaving detectives with little to go on. They began re-examining everyone previously considered a suspect in her case, but it yielded no results. The next day, Midsi's disappearance made headlines not only in the local news, but statewide. Everyone feared a serial kidnapper was at large and dreaded the possibility of him getting away with it once again. Midsi's relatives gave multiple interviews, trying to draw more attention to the case, and her mom also pleaded with the possible abductor to return her daughter safely. The police received many testimony, but none were helpful. However, everything changed a day after Midsi went missing when something surprising occurred. A man contacted the police, saying he found bloody rags at a garbage dump. Experts confirmed the rags were bed sheets from a Vallejo hotel. They sent the evidence for blood analysis, which would take days. Investigators went to the hotel but couldn't confirm if Midsi had been there. While waiting for lab results, investigators searched the landfill for more clues but found nothing. The following day, August 12th, the police received another call, and it changed the course of this case. Immediately at around 11 a.m., a man reported driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara when a little girl ran up to his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. She climbed into the van's cabin, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. The girl yelled that he had kidnapped her and wanted to kill her. As soon as she was in the van, the perpetrator turned around, got into his car, and fled. Meanwhile, the girl told the driver her name was Midsi Sanchez, and he contacted the police. Officers immediately picked her up and drove her to a hospital for examination. They also called her mother and let her speak to her daughter. Soon after, her relatives rushed to the hospital and reunited with Midsi. Meanwhile, detectives talked to the van driver. The man provided an important lead as he remembered the license plate of the kidnapper's vehicle because it drove off right in front of his van. It was revealed that the van driver was on that road almost by coincidence. He had a day off, but was asked by his supervisor to cover a shift and deliver a load. If he hadn't been there, the suspect might have caught up with Midsi. The police ran the license plate and identified the car belonging to a 39-year-old man named Curtis Dean Anderson. He had been on law enforcement's radar before, with prior convictions for thefts, kidnapping, and suspicion of other crimes. Investigators were focused on finding the abductor, while their colleagues were getting ready to listen to Midsi's story. She recounted how on August 10th, after school, she was excited to go home and celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, Midsi chose to go home alone without waiting for her brother. Not far from school, she saw a car parked on the side of the road. A man inside was observing her closely in the rearview mirror. Midsi felt uneasy but dismissed it quickly, thinking it was daytime. She was on a familiar street, and being young, she didn't fully understand the potential danger from strangers. As Midsi approached the car, the man got out and asked her to help him. He said he needed to grab a roll of tape from under the car seat, explaining that he couldn't bend down himself due to a leg injury from falling off his bike. Despite her uneasy feeling, Midsi agreed to help. At that time, she couldn't fully comprehend the potential danger posed by the adult man, and her parents had always taught her to help others. As soon as Midsi reached for the tape, the perpetrator shoved her inside, covered her mouth with his hand, and slammed the door shut. Midsi tried to scream, but it was too late. The kidnapper drove off in an unknown direction, leaving her to gaze out the window in horror. At one point, they passed Midsi's home, and she saw her relatives preparing to celebrate her birthday. A few minutes later, the kidnapper pulled into a deserted parking lot. He gave Midsi new clothes, forced her to change, and discarded her old clothing in a nearby trash bin. He also warned Midsi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one ever managed to get away from him. In the next few hours, he drove Midsi in an unknown direction. At one point, she asked why he had kidnapped her, and the man simply replied that the same had happened to him when he was a child. When it got dark, he parked again and began covering the car windows with some rags. He then pulled out a chain and secured it to Midsi's leg with a padlock. The perpetrator then took out a bottle of alcohol and forced her to take a few sips. Midsi tried to argue with him, but eventually complied with his demand. After that, the man grabbed a camera and took several pictures of Midsi, then laid down to sleep right in the car. Midsi tried to keep her eyes open, afraid of falling asleep. She was thinking how to escape, and at one point saw a police car drive past the parking lot, but it was far away, and even if Midsi had screamed, the officers would never have been able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued driving her around the city. He made her sit on the floor of the car and covered her with sheets to hide her from view. At one point, he stopped and got out for a few minutes. Midsi tried to free her leg from the chain, but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and attempted to unlock the padlock, but it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, Midsi remained trapped. He claimed he had stopped by her parents' house. The kidnapper pretended to be a concerned citizen and asked for flyers to distribute around town. Midsi was shocked and overwhelmed. She had been so close to home, yet still remained in captivity. Midsi quickly understood that she needed to unlock the padlock on her chain. She was scared of what the perpetrator might do if she didn't, but she overcame her fear. She took the bunch of keys, chose one that looked like it would work best, and tried to unlock it. She was surprised when it actually worked. Midsi then freed herself from the chain, with only the car door left standing between her and freedom. Midsi opened the window and tried to climb out through it, but she encountered another problem. She was so exhausted that she could barely move her legs. Gathering all her strength, she managed to lift herself and leap out of the car. As she crawled around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who immediately noticed her. The man began shouting for her to come back, but Midsi had no intention of giving up. With her last ounce of energy, she ran in the opposite direction. The perpetrator chased after her, and Midsi tried to flag down passing cars for help. She waved and screamed, but they all drove past. Despite this, Midsi kept moving toward her freedom. She had no doubt that if she stopped for even a second, the perpetrator would catch up and harm her. Everything happened very quickly, but for Midsi, this moment stretched on forever. Eventually, she spotted a van, ran towards it, and jumped right in front of it. The driver quickly stopped, and Midsi climbed into the cabin. She was shocked, dehydrated, and hungry, but her life was no longer in danger. At the hospital, doctors provided her with the necessary assistance, and soon her entire family arrived to reunite with her. Midsi's miraculous rescue instantly became the main news story in the city. When she was brought home, thousands of people gathered on her street, applauding her and shouting birthday greetings, which she had missed. Meanwhile, the police were hunting down the kidnapper, whose whereabouts remained unknown. When they showed his photo to Midsi's mother, she realized she had actually seen him twice. The first time was before her daughter's abduction, when he stood on their street and looked towards their house. The second time was the day after Midsi's disappearance, when the perpetrator came to her home and asked for flyers. The search for Curtis continued until late evening. Police set up surveillance at all known places he frequented, and eventually, it paid off. He came to a trailer park and was apprehended without resistance. Curtis was booked in jail, awaiting trial, and detectives began investigating his possible connections to other crimes. The man himself told Midsi she wasn't his first victim, and no one had managed to escape him. Investigators could not believe that this was the suspect's first time committing a crime like this. His actions were calculated and indicated that he had experience in such atrocities. Curtis had a history of kidnapping a woman in 1991 and had been released from prison in 1999. Police were certain that he had killed 7-year-old Gianna Fairchild after his release. There was also no doubt that he intended to kill Midsi. Moreover, one specific fact directly indicated that it was supposed to happen on the day of her escape. Police learned that Curtis had stopped in the industrial area he used to work in, and that day he visited his former colleagues. He had asked them for a large bag, and detectives immediately realized he planned to dispose of a body in it. After Curtis's arrest, Midsi struggled to recover for a long time. However, she soon learned that the police were suspecting him of kidnapping Zana, which made her even more uneasy. While Midsi was glad she managed to escape, she knew the ordeal was far from over. She also worried about the fate of this 7-year-old girl. More than 8 months have passed since her disappearance, and there was no news about Zana's fate. Midsi wanted to help find her, so just days after her own rescue, she participated in a search operation along with other volunteers. Unfortunately, they couldn't find any new leads on Zana's possible whereabouts. This continued until January 2001, when a human skull was found in the mountains near the city of Santa Cruz. Forensic analysis showed it belonged to Zana, and she was officially declared dead. Midsi took this news very hard, but ahead of her was another challenge, the trial. It began in April of the same year. Midsi had to testify before the full courtroom and recount in every detail what Curtis had done to her. He was also present there, but despite all of this, Midsi managed to fulfill her task in the end. Curtis was sentenced to 251 years in prison, but that wasn't the end of his story. Detectives visited Curtis in jail multiple times and questioned him about possible involvement in other crimes. He confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and killing 8 other girls. The inmate agreed to work with the police and shared Curtis's words in detail. Curtis didn't deny anything but tried to negotiate for privileges, speaking cryptically with detectives. Eventually, He hinted that he had indeed murdered Gianna Fairchild and at least 13 other girls and women. In 2005, he finally fully confessed to Gianna's murder, resulting in an additional 50-year sentence. As for Midsi, her challenges didn't end with Curtis's trial. Just a few weeks after her rescue, she returned to school, where she faced bullying from other children. They called her the kidnapped girl, said she should have died instead of being saved, and generally behaved extremely inappropriately. As a result, her school years became a heavy burden for her, and along with the tragedy she had experienced, it didn't help in her recovery process. Midsi also repeatedly joined the searches for other missing children, but more often than not, it ended with the discovery of their bodies. Each time, she felt this tragedy as if it were her own, and ultimately, she couldn't cope with this pressure anymore. Alcohol became her only way to cope with the stress, and with each passing day, Midsi turned to it more and more frequently. Eventually, she stopped seeing even the slightest chance of returning to a normal life. But one day, everything changed. Midsi was involved in a serious car accident after a party with friends. She broke her neck and arm and spent 2 weeks in a coma. When she woke up, doctors informed her that she is pregnant and would have a daughter. This news turned her life upside down, and Midsi found the strength to change it for the better once again. She decided to dedicate all her time not only to her daughter, but also to other children who became victims of various crimes. She founded a non-profit organization that continues to provide assistance to those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he died of illness in 2007, just 6 years after being sentenced. The only reason the detectives regretted it was the fact that they had not managed to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of, although they still haven't been solved. The police continue to consider his involvement highly probable. It is worth mentioning that Curtis had a son who followed in his father's footsteps. He was convicted of murder, and in 2019, his own life ended in prison.
On August 8, 2020, in Anchorage, Alaska, 2 Anchorage police officers responded to a 911 call made by Lizette Hoagland Hall. When they arrived at her home, they found Lizette Hoagland Hall, her son Desmond, and Lizette's friend Elizabeth Omatara Santos. Elizabeth was bleeding to death from multiple stab wounds. Hi, welcome back to Mysterious 7. My name is Matt, and today I'm going to take you back 2 years in the past to tell you Elizabeth's story. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This one was pretty upsetting for me. On this channel, I try to be as honest with you guys as I can, but I have to be clear. There are some very graphic details and untold secrets that are still unfolding in this case, much of which are difficult to stomach. And it is starting to feel pretty personal to me. You see, this is the first time on Mysterious 7 that we have personally responded to a cry for help. We are not professional investigators, but when Elizabeth's brother, Midsi Sanchez, reached out to us, we knew we had to tell his story. Elizabeth Omatara Santos was a 37-year-old African-American woman of Nigerian-Brazilian ancestry. She was a Florida native and had been living in Alaska on and off since 2010. In the days leading up to her death, Elizabeth had just broken up with her boyfriend of 10 years, Dustin Curpius. At that point, Elizabeth left Dustin's home and went to stay with her friend and co-worker, Lizette Hoagland Hall. All friends who were interviewed by the APD following her death stated that Elizabeth was happy with the breakup, but still worried about her ex-boyfriend. Elizabeth's friends all described her as one of the sweetest, kindest, and calmest people they ever knew. Unfortunately, an argument and confrontation with Lizette wound up cutting her life short. Now, we still don't know exactly what started that fight, but the following sequence of events comes straight from police records. At 6 a.m., the fight between Lizette Hoagland Hall and Elizabeth Santos began. Lizette claimed that she and her adult son, Desmond Marcus Hall, managed to run upstairs to the second floor of their home to hide in a bathroom. From there, Lizette called 911, claiming that she was in fear for her life. At 6:16 a.m., patrol officers Tae Yoon and Valeria Estrella from the APB arrived on the scene. Once on the scene, they observed that Elizabeth was showing symptoms of mental confusion, including erratic movements and slurred speech as she was unable to speak clearly. The officers quickly assumed that behavior probably stemmed from some kind of substance that she had consumed. They noted that Elizabeth was dressed only in an open robe. The officers claimed that Elizabeth's wounds didn't seem serious, but case photos and documentation showed that the robe she was wearing was heavily saturated in blood. The officers made note of the bruising and scratches on Lizette's face that stemmed from her recent fight with Elizabeth. The second was that the surroundings were messy with knocked-over plants. At 6:42 a.m., Elizabeth was placed into handcuffs. At 6:46 a.m., paramedics arrived and Elizabeth was placed in an ambulance. At 7:23 a.m., the paramedics officially began the transport to the hospital, 37 minutes after Elizabeth was placed inside. At 7:36 a.m., the ambulance reached the hospital and Elizabeth was rushed into emergency surgery. Reports mention that the surgeons were confused about the information they were given, especially considering the extent of the injuries and the extreme blood loss.
At 7:56 a.m., the same two patrol officers, Yoon and Estrella, were dispatched and told to return to the scene to take Lizette and Desmond into custody. At 8:20 a.m., the same two officers finally returned to the scene of the crime. Minutes prior, Lizette had managed to somehow unlock Elizabeth's iPhone and call Elizabeth's sister Nikki in Miami. Nikki thought that it was Elizabeth calling, so imagine her utter shock and confusion when she heard a loud and belligerent woman yelling, "Your sister Elizabeth owes me money. She has some holes in her. Your sister owes me money. The paramedics left with her a while ago. She has holes in her. Elizabeth owes me some money. Wait, now the cops are back." That was how Elizabeth's family, all the way across the country in Miami, first found out about her life-threatening injuries. Lizette and Desmond were then driven to the police station in separate cars and interviewed in separate rooms. Now, to me, this part sounds like shutting the barn door long after the horses have run off and gone, doesn't it? Because this mother and son duo had more than enough time between the departure and return of the officers to potentially plot what to say and what not to say, and to tamper with the crime scene. So why was it assumed that they had done nothing and were in no way responsible for what happened to Elizabeth in their house? But let's get back to the timeline here. At 10:30 a.m., Lizette was interviewed by Officer Jason DeVille. During her statement, Lizette told the interviewing officer the story about the fight, running to hide and calling 911 with her son, and then seeing Elizabeth's injuries for the first time when the patrol officers arrived on the scene. Lizette later described the fight with Elizabeth in more detail to Officer DeVille.
And I just started calling over. The upstairs or downstairs?
He was downstairs, then I don't know if he was in the bathroom or in his bedroom downstairs. Yeah, the thing is downstairs. And so I went upstairs. She want to go back and kind of like a oriented guy. So as you're on your back and she's trying to call you, bite you, how are you defending yourself?
I'm just kind of block you.
So you have your hands in front of your face.
I know, literally yeah.
Okay, the fucking. And then, but she eventually stopped.
No, I mean, yes, I only to get gone away from her own unit. I was there. I just kind of scooted my way and ran out to tears and I told my phone calling her husband, and then, she brought his phone. I didn't even call from my own phone, and my phone, I lost me to my side call. That's what, instead, she brought his phone upstairs. She and I hid. And I went for to hide her. in my room, we locked the door and so my dad room has two doors. It goes like this, two doors. And she's like banging on the doors.
So you're in the bathroom.
No, it's connected. The bathroom is connected to my bedroom.
So you're hiding in your bedroom.
With the doors locked. Oh, me and my son are both in that room with the doors locked. And we hear her in the kitchen. We hear her out there saying that and it sounds like it not really like you can hear it. It's more like that. So it's like I think that's impression.
She's banging on the door for that. You have to do her up.
Why she was about to bust to open the door straight, or so what you do is all like welding straight to get it out.
In this interview, Lizette claimed that Elizabeth had been banging and screaming at her locked bedroom door during that 6 a.m. 911 phone call. However, none of these alleged noises could be heard in the background during that call. Also, something that should be mentioned is that Lizette lives in a duplex, and her next-door neighbor that she shares a wall with did not recall hearing any noise around that time either. She did, however, mention hearing banging noises around 3 a.m. Lizette further described how Elizabeth had no injuries prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. So the injuries just magically appeared just as the police officers showed up. But also, Lizette saw Elizabeth inflicting the injuries on herself earlier, and Elizabeth was able to bang on the room door and stab herself repeatedly at the same time. Sure, that checks out. Lizette then describes to Officer DeVille the main knife that Elizabeth allegedly used to stab herself with many times over and its possible location.
Did you see anything? He said when you came out, you saw water and stuff. Did you see anything in your house that might have caused that? And he's like, well, I saw a knife.
Okay, so you didn't see a knife.
But I didn't do anything because I was singing on the phone.
Okay, what was the knife?
Upstairs on the
We're at it.
Next to the couch.
Oh, what type of knife is this?
It's just like it's either a thick knife or it was like the next size up. Like, like it's one or the other.
At 10:33 a.m., Desmond Hall was interviewed by Detective Jeff Bell over in the very next interrogation room. Rather than explaining what happened, Desmond asked for an attorney.
So she has an injury. She's at the hospital. And so things had to change from when the police first got there to now. Just very serious injuries. So, so that's why we got all that's why it's not the digger the oven. Quite originally on maybe theme. Very well be an explanation for it. At 12:48 p.m., Officer DeVille returned to Lizette's interrogation room and informed her of Elizabeth's death at the hospital. Now, bear in mind that previously, Lizette stated that Elizabeth was uninjured prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. But Lizette's story immediately changed once she learned about the death. Yes, we're hiding in the room, and I thought that we were hiding. I had my son and I don't care.
I says this after the voice pin, or right before.
I also tried to not more swallow and let up to this house, and then I heard her in the cute room. And then I heard moan and I heard the talking and stuff. But I was like, baby, who saying it here for the cops got.
I know. I heard it. My age widget that she just like and I like the words, but I just like. Never like I was in the age. Island's home alley and door. I just like at the end of it. I had the door locked, even if still I didn't would honor the like kusken because door other nights Later that afternoon, both Lizette and Desmond were freed from police custody. And despite Lizette's criminal history, neither her nor her son, Desmond Hall, were ever charged. After Elizabeth's death, a lot of misinformation was set in motion by her ex-boyfriend, Dustin. He told the APD that one time in the past, Elizabeth had supposedly handled a knife while having an altercation with him. However, Dustin's own sister commented that his memory can't necessarily be trusted, since he was often very forgetful as a result of his epilepsy, which causes occasional seizures. Incidentally, Elizabeth's toxicology report shows the presence of midazolam, a medication that Elizabeth was never prescribed and is used to treat seizures. Multiple friends of Elizabeth that were interviewed by the APD all disputed Lizette's description of her behavior. They all describe her as a non-violent, non-drug user and in a good mood when they last spoke. One friend in particular last saw Elizabeth 6 days earlier, but mentioned that Elizabeth called her the day before her death.
He called me with that he would look like that. That he forgot that like he was going to shoot her or something.
The day of Elizabeth's death, Lizette began to tell people that she had watched Elizabeth stab herself repeatedly and slit her own throat. Detective Bell called another friend that Elizabeth attempted to contact a couple of hours before the stabbing, and Bell asked for his perspective. Additional audio evidence from that day has recently surfaced that was originally suppressed by the APD, which includes first-hand accounts of what Lizette's neighbors saw and heard that morning.
She only said 2 sentences, but she kept on screaming. And all those screaming and just the loudest. Boy, she can hear someone put out like the ghost. Real loud.
Perhaps the most compelling eyewitness statement came from a neighbor who, according to Google Earth, lives only 177 feet away from Lizette's home. So as the family continued to fight to get the case reopened, they found it even more disturbing in January of 2021 when they found out that many of Elizabeth's friends and associates in Anchorage had thrown a birthday party for her around that same time. But who throws a birthday party for someone who recently died brutally under extremely abnormal circumstances and then invites the main suspect? As you can see from these images, they clearly had a great time. One friend in attendance did tell the family that he showed up in support of Elizabeth's memory, but was quickly creeped out by the aura upon arrival and Lizette's presence. Is it even possible that the extremely weird and horrifyingly inappropriate birthday party was intended as some sort of celebration of Elizabeth's death instead of her life? I mean, hey, it has been known to happen. The Santos family has also attempted to gain police dashcam footage of the APD patrol officer's initial arrival to Lizette's home, but the APD claims that this footage does not exist. Based on jurisdictional restrictions, only an attorney licensed in Alaska can help the Santos family fight for justice. To date, the family has reached out to various law firms in Alaska, the State Bar Association, the Alaska Bureau of Investigations, the ACLU, and countless reporters, including the only reporter who wrote about the incident, Marlise Irby of KTUU. Their pleas for assistance have been ignored constantly, and reporter Marlise Irby eventually left the station without ever replying to requests to update her article. Other reporters in Anchorage have interviewed the family and promised to release the story, but never have. After further review of the crime scene photos, it was determined that there was actually a 4th knife found on a scene that was never mentioned in the police report. This knife was found in the garage nearby where Lizette said the fight between her and Elizabeth occurred. To further add to this, a recent conversation between Desmond Hall and a private investigator also confirms that Elizabeth did not stab herself.
It's almost like that was a ghost. I didn't see her grab the line. I didn't see her cutting herself.
The head of APD's homicide unit, Sergeant Bianca Cross, and her superior officers still insist that the blood-soaked open robe that Elizabeth was wearing was actually soaked in sweat. Based on police reports, Lizette claims that the only substance she gave Elizabeth in the hours leading up to her death were 4 Benadryls. Also, keep in mind one key fact, that Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend Dustin and Lizette's son Desmond are also friends with one another. Sergeant Cross continues to claim that there were no signs of a struggle and that the APD has no suspects. To date, Cross refuses to process any of the collected forensic information collected the day of the murder. The case was never ruled a homicide, and contrary to popular belief, it was never ruled a suicide by the medical examiner, and Elizabeth had no injuries to the neck whatsoever. Overall, it is really concerning as to why the APD and the media are going to such great lengths to suppress the story. Thus, it begs the question, who is connected to whom, and why is it so important that this case remains suppressed? In the state of Alaska, the statute of limitations to file a civil suit in a case like this is 2 years. August 8, 2022 marks this 2-year deadline, so it is most likely that the APD knows that they botched the entire investigation so badly that they are purposely waiting for this date to pass before they admit fault and reopen the case. So that's how it turned out that Elizabeth Omatara Santos, a young woman with no previous known history of violence, drug abuse, or mental instability, ended up dying from accidentally stabbing herself 10 times. According to our own verification and research, the drug midazolam typically produces sleepiness and is also used in surgical procedures for anesthesia. However, it was confirmed that it was never given to her during her emergency surgery. Based on the narrative that Desmond provided to the private investigator, the presence of midazolam and what Elizabeth was wearing, was it possible that sexual assault was also involved? Because honestly, I'd love to know how a drugged and incoherent person could possibly be insane enough to quickly stab themselves at least 10 times, yet coordinated enough to do it with 3 different knives and neatly clean each one and plant them in 3 different locations, all while pounding at a locked bedroom door. All I can say is that this whole case, with all its many inconsistencies, has left a severely bad taste in my mouth. Lastly, following Elizabeth's death, rumors resurfaced that was also allegedly involved in the fatal stabbing of her ex-boyfriend in Alaska a few years earlier. Now, while we cannot confirm this, there is a plethora of evidence supporting the incident with Elizabeth Santos, and there haven't been any reports on it either. In less than 2 months, the window for a civil lawsuit of legal liability against the APD will close for this case. We have until August 2022 to get the word out. We'll continue with this investigation for as long as we can, and we hope to bring you some real answers in a follow-up episode. In the meantime, we need your support. Sign the petition, share this video, and let's get the word out about the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Santos. The links are in the description of this video. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. If her killers are walking free today, we want to see them caught and brought to justice. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Wang Nan. The betrayal of a loved one invariably catches us off guard because we consider people close to us when trust is fully established. With such trust, a stab in the back is unexpected. But what happens if the plan were not fully executed? The victim might be unable to testify due to a serious condition, while the perpetrator frantically tries to cover their tracks without arousing suspicion. It resembles the plot of a thriller, yet, regrettably, this story unfolded a few years ago in real life. This case involved Wang Nan, a pregnant Chinese woman. It became widely known in Thailand. The perpetrator tried to dispose of his wife in a national park and make it appear like a tragic accident. However, nature itself seemed to intervene, saving both the young woman and her child from being killed. When the truth emerged, it shocked not only the detectives on the case, but also the doctors who saved her life. They all believed that her husband was genuinely concerned for his wife and baby. Let's delve deeper into Wang Nan's story. Wang Nan was born in Nanjing, China's former capital and major metropolitan city, in 1987. She grew up in a fairly affluent family where her parents endeavored to provide her with an excellent education and foster the development of her talents and potential. Wang excelled academically, particularly in sciences. After completing school, Wang Nan enrolled at a prestigious university where she pursued studies in business and finance. While mastering several foreign languages during her courses, she also achieved stellar academic records. After receiving her diploma, she secured a position in a prominent travel agency. She swiftly proved herself a valuable, responsible, and highly motivated employee. Her dedication enabled her to climb the career ladder quickly. Before long, she was sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Nan served as a top manager for several years, but decided to leave the travel agency eventually. She pursued her entrepreneurial dreams by opening a Chinese national cuisine restaurant. She managed it so effectively that it grew into a small yet popular chain in Bangkok. Despite nearing 30 years old and living in Thailand for an extended period, Wang didn't let loneliness bother her much. She stayed focused on business and worked tirelessly around the clock. Even though she had learned the local language well enough, she opted to refine her skills further by enrolling in additional courses at a training center. During one of these sessions, Wang met a young man named Yu Xiaodong who couldn't help but stare at her for several minutes before approaching. Speaking native language, they exchanged pleasantries. Yu Xiaodong eventually asked Nan why she was studying this language further. She explained that it was essential for developing her business. Yu then suggested they exchange business cards for future networking opportunities. Although Nan wasn't particularly interested in extending their conversation, out of politeness, she handed him her business card and accepted his in return. His card indicated that Yu Xiaodong operated an export-import business in Bangkok. Wang wasn't particularly impressed and casually tossed the business card into her purse, likely forgetting about it soon after. However, Yu seemed genuinely interested in the young woman and decided to call her the very next day. Nan was busy with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes for a conversation, so she declined his offer to meet for coffee. A few days later, a similar situation occurred, with Nan once again refusing due to her hectic schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference. She intended to expand her professional network and create new business partnerships there. Yu Xiaodong attended the event with a stunning bouquet of flowers, patiently waiting for an opportunity to approach Nan once she was free. When he did, he asked her out again. This time, Wang Nan was swayed by his persistence. No one had ever tried so hard to gain her attention before. She agreed to meet him for dinner. What followed appeared to be an unforeseen romance. Yu didn't just fall in love with Nan, he seemed utterly captivated by her. He constantly expressed his affection through thoughtful gestures, surprising her with gifts and flowers every morning accompanied by little romantic notes. He also called at least twice daily to wish her good morning and good night. Nan's feelings were mixed. On one hand, she felt annoyed by Yu's persistent attention. On the other hand, she was flattered that someone would go to such lengths to win her over. Unexpectedly, for the first time in a long while, she found herself immersed in a romantic relationship. Yu endeavored not just to court her well, but also aimed for perfection in every aspect of their relationship. He shared many of Wang's interests and viewpoints, learned how to cook her favorite dishes, and sought to make their time together enjoyable by securing tickets to various events. Moreover, he showed readiness to assist with both professional and personal tasks at the first sign of need. Wang Nan could hardly believe her luck. It all felt like something from a movie, but was happening in real life. However, Yu seemed in too much of a hurry. They had only been dating for several months when he began planning their wedding and even thinking up names for potential future children. Wang felt a bit uneasy with this type of. At moments like these, she found herself discussing how they were both in their 30s. At that age, it was natural to start planning for a family and a wedding, even without rings and veils. Nan, unsure of how to act or respond to her suitor's behavior, acknowledged that he was right about their age. Still, she harbored doubts about whether he was the person to marry. After yet another deep, heartfelt discussion where Nan candidly expressed her uncertainties, Yu assured her that he would demonstrate his love that very night. Once home, the man in love sent his girlfriend a lengthy and touching letter filled with tenderness. He confessed his love for her and promised to be the best husband and father to their future children. The next morning, Wang found her suitor standing on her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers. Xiaodong declared that he had never been so serious in his intentions and was ready to marry her immediately. Nan pointed out that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half. To this, Yu suggested going there right away, stating that if the door was open, they would get married immediately. Wang agreed to this venture, confident that the government office would be closed. To her astonishment, the door was indeed open, and the officer authorized to register marriages was already at his desk. It later became clear that Yu had arranged everything in advance by requesting an early exception for him and his bride. Their wedding proved strange. No guests attended, there were no rings or formal dress. Even memorable photos were absent. Wang Nan couldn't shake off the feeling that nothing about this felt genuine, since she hadn't even introduced her chosen partner to her mother, with whom she had always been very close. As she regained awareness of the situation, she found herself holding a marriage certificate. Next to her stood a satisfied and smiling newlywed husband. In June 2019, a tragic accident occurred when Wang was 3 months pregnant. Her husband persuaded her to arrange a vacation and go on a small trip, reasoning that after the birth of the baby, they would not be able to get out anywhere for a long time. Nan reluctantly agreed, and they chose the Thai National Park Reserve, famous for its picturesque forests and unique rock paintings, the age of which is estimated at tens of thousands of years. However, on the morning of June 9th, tragedy struck. The couple were on one of the observation decks admiring the sunrise, when Wang Nan suddenly fell from a height of 1 foot. When rescuers arrived at the scene, a crying man ran up to them and begged for medics to save his wife and the baby. The man said they were enjoying the first rays of the rising sun when suddenly his wife felt sick. She took a step to the side but became dizzy and fell before he could catch her. The young woman had fallen from a height equivalent to 10 floors. She had several open fractures and the situation seemed hopeless. But then, unexpectedly, Nan groaned and opened her eyes. Her husband immediately stopped crying and wailing. A look of horror appeared on his face. However, he quickly composed himself, expressed immense relief that his beloved was alive by thanking Providence loudly, and then leaned in to whisper something in Chinese into her ear. Before delving into that tragic day's events further, let's rewind 6 months to understand how their family life was unfolding. Wang regretted her marriage almost immediately after it was registered. Initially, she hoped Yu would be a good husband, reliable support, and someone she could rely on. Unfortunately, these hopes were dashed as her new husband revealed his true nature soon after. He spent almost all his time at home playing computer games and willingly used his wife's money without contributing anything to the family budget. When questioned about not working, Xiaodong replied that his business was in a seasonal lull and claimed he could rest for now. However, this lull extended too long for comfort. Curious about her husband's work claims, the young woman decided to investigate further. That's when she discovered that his so-called successful export-import existed only on paper and printed business cards. At that moment, Wang comprehended the enormity of the mistake she had made. She hadn't even considered drafting a prenup agreement, so now her husband could freely spend what she earned. In case of a divorce, he would claim her property. The couple had a serious conversation during which he cried like a child and assured her that he had temporary difficulties but would definitely improve and find a good job. However, it soon became evident that he wasn't planning to seek employment and felt quite comfortable living off his wife's earnings. He behaved like a child, spending most of his time playing computer games. If he did something around the house or helped his wife at the restaurant, he always asked for money for his own needs. Wang eventually grew tired of this behavior and informed him that she would no longer give him any money until he found a job. Following this confrontation, he disappeared. Along with him went Nan's marriage certificate and identity card, though she only noticed the missing documents in the evening when her accountant called about the transfer of a significant sum from her account. The young woman was shocked because she hadn't authorized any transfer. She quickly suspected who was responsible. The amount involved was more than $500,000, which her husband had moved to his personal account using their marriage certificate, her documents, and assurances that it was their joint money managed together. Wang didn't hesitate to report the theft to the police. The fugitive husband was tracked down within hours as he attempted to withdraw some of the funds at a station. He sobbed again and knelt, begging for his wife's forgiveness. He admitted to losing a large sum gambling and claimed debts threatened his life if not repaid. Additionally, it turned out this wasn't his first run-in with the law. Back in China, he had served 8 years for robbery. Nan nearly burned with shame at this revelation. When she listened to all this, it turned out she did not know the man she married. However, the young woman felt that gambling is a disease and believed she must help her husband overcome this addiction and return to normal life. Wang agreed to pay off half of her husband's debt and made him the manager of one of her restaurants. At first, Yu Xiaodong accepted it gratefully and took on his new position responsibly. He even developed a good strategy for the establishment's growth. But his enthusiasm didn't last long. Soon, he started spending more time playing computer games and seeking out entertainment. Around that time, Wang discovered she was pregnant. She informed her husband, but he reacted strangely and even aggressively. Yu said he wasn't ready for this and persuaded his wife to have an abortion, which she categorically refused. Then, her husband threatened divorce and said he intended to seek a division of property through the court. He didn't speak to his wife for several days, but then suddenly softened and apologized. Yu admitted that he spoke out of emotion and was actually happy about the upcoming edition. He began showing care again by cooking and helping around the house. 2 months later, Wang was absolutely happy because her marriage seemed almost perfect, just as promised by her lover at the beginning of their relationship. He was attentive, caring, fulfilled his job as manager responsibly, and actively prepared their home for the child's arrival. One day, Xiaodong suggested ensuring Wang's life and health because she was pregnant. Such a step would protect both her and the baby in case of various unforeseen situations. The young woman agreed readily and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it before. The insurance was taken out the very next day, and a couple of weeks later, Yu talked about taking a vacation to relax and unwind. Wang was hesitant at first, but her husband insisted they hadn't had a honeymoon yet. With a baby on the way, traveling wouldn't be possible in coming years. He mentioned that they had gone through a difficult period and needed to reset to dispel all the negativity and heavy thoughts. In the end, his arguments proved convincing, so Nan agreed. Her husband chose the place himself, booked the hotel, mapped out the activities, and planned the itineraries meticulously. He ensured the trip would be exciting, but not too exhausting for his pregnant wife. Nan entrusted everything to her husband and was pleased to see how enthusiastic he was about planning their vacation. On June 7th, the couple arrived at the park for the first time and spent most of the day there. They walked a lot and visited numerous beautiful sights and lookouts. That summer Friday evening, the park was teeming with visitors. Towards evening, Wang noticed that her husband was getting visibly angry and nervous. When she asked if everything was all right, he replied that due to the crowd of tourists, they couldn't have privacy or enjoy the sunset in silence. Relenting eventually, Wang Nan decided it would be very romantic as the sun set since fewer people were around. Yu Xiaodong climbed the fence of the observation deck and called his wife to join him at the edge, promising an incredible view. However, Wang refused because it was already dark and could be dangerous. Though initially upset, her husband returned after a few minutes and suggested they come back to meet sunrise at the park. Since they returned to their hotel well past midnight on Friday, they decided to rest on Saturday and head back early Sunday morning as planned. Early Sunday morning on June 9th, they went to admire the rising sun at the national park. Waking up around 3 a.m. while it was still dark outside meant there were hardly any visitors. For a moment, Nan thought they were all alone there. The couple witnessed dawn from one of the observation decks before Yu Xiaodong descended towards a cliff, persuading his wife to join him in admiring rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Nan approached cautiously upon her husband's assurances regarding safety. The view from up there was indeed mesmerizing. Yu Xiaodong hugged his wife, then suddenly asked if she regretted anything in life. Surprised by such an inquiry, but confident nonetheless, Nan responded that she didn't regret anything. Yu Xiaodong gently ran his hand through his wife's hair, kissed her on the cheek, and leaned in close to whisper in her ear, "Die." At that moment, he let go of her and pushed her off the cliff. He his surroundings once more to ensure there were no witnesses. Airing down, he could pinpoint where exactly she had fallen. He listened carefully. There were no screams or cries for help. This confirmed there were no witnesses below either. Yu Xiaodong then calmly made his way toward the park exit, intending to report the incident later when Wang was surely dead. However, a few hikers who had strayed off the trail discovered Wang's body on the rocks and immediately notified rescuers. By this time, Yu Xiaodong had already left the scents. As several emergency vehicles sped past him with sirens blaring, he quickly realized what was happening and returned to the scene. Upon reaching the site where his wife had fallen, he put on a convincing display of grief. Tears, screams, and desperate pleas for help ensued. Believing his wife was dead, he felt assured that no one would uncover the truth. But during the fall, Wang was caught by tree branches, slowing her descent. She first landed on bushes before rolling onto rocks. This sequence cushioned her fall and saved both her life and that of their unborn child, though she sustained serious injuries. As Yu Xiaodong continued his lamentations about not wanting to live without his beloved wife and child, she unexpectedly opened her eyes and attempted to speak, but couldn't form words. Observers noted the genuine terror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but saw him quickly regain composure as he leaned over her again, hissing in Chinese for her to remain silent if she wished to live. Attempts to finalize his grim intentions failed. Wang suffered severe head trauma, multiple closed and open fractures, numerous lacerations and contusions of soft tissue, and ruptured internal organs, leading to massive blood loss. Additionally, her spine was critically damaged. Doctors feared that even if she survived, she might never walk again. Wang spent several days in a coma, hooked up to life support machines, as medical staff worked tirelessly to save her life. During this time, her husband never left her side, spending both days and nights in her room. The doctors praised his dedication and love. However, when Yu Xiaodong was alone with his wife, he contemplated how to end her life without raising suspicion. He examined the medical equipment thoroughly, but couldn't figure out how to disable it discreetly. The horrifying truth and the tragic loss of a child became evident when Wang regained consciousness. Her husband was terrified, not leaving her alone for a moment, fearing she might reveal the truth to the police at any time. When alone with her, he threatened her again, stating he had nothing left to lose. In the initial interrogation, Wang corroborated her husband's story, saying that dizziness caused her fall. Yet a few hours later, when her husband out briefly, she asked a nurse to call the police and ensure he didn't enter her room. That's when she recounted the harrowing story of how he had tried to kill her. Yu Xiaodong stormed into the room, claiming she was delusional due to head trauma and asserting he'd never harm her or their baby. His statement seemed highly unconvincing, and he was taken into custody that same day. He faced multiple charges, including attempted murder and intimidation. When her husband was arrested and jailed awaiting trial, Wang felt a profound relief. Though she faced an extended period of rehabilitation ahead of her, she now felt secure. Initially hopeful that her pregnancy could be saved, since the baby survived the fall from such heights, complications arose. Due to potent painkillers, several surgeries under general anesthesia, and required antibiotics use, doctors recommended an abortion, prioritizing Wang's health, as survival chances for the fetus were minimal due to drug exposure. It was a significant shock for Nan, but she adhered to the doctor's recommendations. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Xiaodong consistently denied his guilt. In prison, he remained calm, hired skilled lawyers, and was confident he would escape punishment or that it wouldn't be too severe. Investigators and the prosecutor in charge of the case had no doubt that he committed the crime out of interest, hoping to receive a large insurance payout and inherit his wife's fortune, which at that time amounted to almost $2.5 million. However, during one of the interrogations, Xiao shocked everyone by revealing another motive for his inhumane act. It turns out he held resentment towards his wife when she agreed to repay only half of his debt accrued due to a passion for gambling. In his opinion, if his wife truly loved him, she would have settled all his debts because she had the money. He then decided Wang did not love him and felt justified in punishing her for it. After these revelations, Xiao fell silent and claimed he had been misunderstood. But this unexpected confession, coupled with Nan's testimony, was sufficient to send him to prison for a long duration. By March 2021, Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, Xiao and his legal team filed several appeals. Just 6 months later, the Thai court demonstrated surprising leniency by reducing the life sentence to just 10 years in prison. Nan and her loved ones were deeply shocked by this decision. They expressed concerns that such leniency could set a dangerous precedent and might encourage others to commit similar horrific acts. Around that same period in Thailand, on Phuket Island, a comparable case took place where a Chinese national drowned his wife while claiming it was a swimming accident on the beach. He also did it for insurance purposes since the murder was proven. Consequently, the man received a death sentence. Xiaodong, on the other hand, was sentenced to just 10 years for the failed murder attempt and for the murder of the fetus. What's Wang Nan's current status? Well, as of now, there's been no final verdict in her case. She's serving her 10-year sentence, and the injured woman is trying to challenge the court's decision in parallel. Yu Xiaodong is also appealing to prove his innocence and secure his release. He stood up for his numerous relatives who claimed he was a wealthy businessman and that Wang married him with selfish motives. However, there's no proof of this. The man has nothing but significant debts. As for Nan, contrary to doctors' predictions, after several complicated surgeries and lengthy rehabilitation, she managed to get back on her feet. She relearned how to walk. Most of her earnings went towards her recovery. In 2023, she resumed work and revitalized her previously successful business. She has also established and leads an organization to help women who are victims of domestic violence. Additionally, she runs a blog aimed at warning women against making the same mistakes she made.